Revenge Office Stories. The COO stood before the entire executive team, a smug grin on his face, and pointed right at me. "And here we have our resident office ghost," he announced, his voice just oozing condescension. A wave of uncomfortable, kiss-up chuckles went through the boardroom, still haunting the building at all hours. "We should start charging you rent." He thought my dedication was a joke. He saw my long hours not as commitment, but as some kind of personal failing he could openly mock. What he never imagined was that the very thing he was ridiculing, my meticulous late-night work, was about to bring his prized, multi-million-dollar product launch to a screeching, humiliating halt. So, let me tell you how my quiet diligence became the career-ending roadblock he never saw coming. It all started at a company called Innovatech, a place that prided itself on being on the bleeding edge of consumer electronics. The office was a shrine to modern corporate aesthetics, open-plan layouts, glass-walled conference rooms, and a kombucha tap in the kitchen that was always broken. The air had this almost frantic energy, a constant push towards the next big thing. I was a senior compliance manager. Not the sexiest title, I know. I wasn't a visionary designer or a wunderkind coder. My job was to work in the shadows, read the fine print, and navigate the tangled mess of international regulations that governed everything from battery safety to data privacy. I was the person who made sure our brilliant ideas didn't end up costing the company millions in fines or, worse, actually hurting someone. My work, by its nature, had to be meticulous. It demanded deep focus and hours of uninterrupted time to pore over dense legal documents from the FCC in the US, the CE standards in Europe, and a dozen other alphabet soup agencies around the world. That kind of deep work was impossible during the day, with the constant ping of emails, endless meetings, and the whole performative hustle of the open plan office. So, I pretty much became a night owl. I'd stay long after the sun went down, when the office was quiet and the frantic buzz was replaced by the low hum of the servers. It was in that solitude that I could do my best work. I saw it as a necessary evil to make sure our products weren't just innovative, but also safe and legal. Our Chief Operating Officer, Daniel Harrison, saw it differently. Harrison was the classic corporate golden boy. He was handsome in a generic, stock photo kind of way, with a perfect smile and a firm handshake that felt more like a power play than a hello. He'd been hired from a competitor with a huge salary and an even bigger ego. His mission was simple: speed up development and crush the market. He lived by the move fast and break things mantra, a philosophy he applied with total, reckless abandon. To him, anything that didn't directly lead to a faster launch date was dead weight, and that apparently included my entire department. He never missed a chance to take a dig at me. It started small. I'd be getting coffee in the morning, and he'd walk by with a big, theatrical yawn. "Rough night, Sarah?" Some of us managed to get our work done and get a full 8 hours. He'd say it with a wink, like we were in on a joke, but the message was clear. My long hours were a sign of inefficiency, not dedication. The comments got more pointed over time. He started calling me the chief of paperwork in executive meetings. "While the real work is being done in engineering," he'd say with a gesture to the developers. "Sarah is making sure all our T's are crossed and I's are dotted." A vital, if not exactly thrilling, contribution. It was always a backhanded compliment, designed to frame my role as just a bureaucratic hurdle to his grand vision. As one of the few women in the male-dominated tech C-suite, I was pretty used to a certain level of condescension. My male colleagues who pulled all-nighters were heroes and rock stars. They were in the trenches. But my dedication was framed as poor work-life balance, a quiet obsession that was kind of pitiable. Harrison, especially, seemed to love this narrative. He'd ask loudly in team meetings if I had any hobbies outside of reading regulatory statutes. His jokes always got the same nervous laugh from junior employees who were too scared to do anything but play along. The project at the center of all this was codenamed Project Chimera, It was Harrison's baby, his ticket to cementing his legacy at Innovatech and eventually becoming CEO. Chimera was a sleek, all-in-one smart home hub that promised to integrate every connected device in your life. It was ambitious, complex, and on a ridiculously aggressive timeline. Harrison had personally promised the board a Q4 launch, right in time for the holidays. The pressure was insane, and he was cutting corners everywhere. He constantly fought my team on compliance checks. "Is this really necessary, Sarah?" He'd sigh when I flagged a potential issue with a new chip. "Our competitors aren't bogged down by this level of paranoia. We need to be agile." To him, I was the Department of No, a roadblock on his glorious march to market. He couldn't get it through his head that the rules I was enforcing weren't my personal opinions. They were federal and international laws. Breaking them wasn't agile. It was just plain reckless. The personal and professional conflict got tangled up. My late hours, which he mocked, were a direct result of the insane timeline he created. His team would deliver final specs weeks late, leaving me just a few days to do months' worth of work. When I'd tell him I needed more time to vet a new component from an uncertified supplier, he'd look at me with that patronizing smile. "Well, Sarah, I guess that means more late nights for the office ghost," he'd say. "Just get it done. Don't be the reason we miss this launch." So the very problem he created became the ammo for his jokes. He pushed the timeline to an impossible degree and then mocked me for the effort it took to even try to keep up. The final straw, the moment that solidified my resolve, happened about 2 months before the Chimera launch. Harrison called a big go/no-go meeting with all the department heads and senior execs, including our CEO, a much quieter, older guy named Mr. Davies. The energy was electric. Harrison was in his element, pacing at the front of the room like a general before a battle, showing off a slideshow with slick graphics and impressive pre-order numbers. "As you can see, team," Harrison boomed, "we are on the precipice of the biggest launch in this company's history. Marketing is primed. The supply chain is humming. The software is almost there." A few nervous laughs. "And thanks to the tireless work of our engineering team, the hardware is locked and ready for mass production." He then clicked to a new slide. It was a picture of me, my awful security badge photo he must have pulled from HR. Underneath it, in a big, playful font, it said the final hurdle. My stomach just clenched. This was new. He was calling me out in front of the CEO. "Now, all that stands between us and market domination is the final compliance paperwork," he continued, a smirk on his lips. "I've been assured by our very own office ghost," he said, nodding at me as the room filled with a mix of groans and forced laughter, "that she's haunting the regulatory archives day and night to get us the green light. Right, Sarah?" All eyes turned to me. I could feel my face get hot, a wave of pure anger and humiliation washing over me. This wasn't a jab in the hallway. This was a calculated performance to frame me as the sole potential point of failure. I somehow kept my composure. My voice was steady, even with the fury churning inside me. "My team is working diligently to ensure Project Chimera meets all global regulatory standards, Daniel," I said, making a point to use his first name. Harrison just waved his hand dismissively. Yes, the complexities. Just tell us it'll be done, Sarah. No one wants to hear about the regulatory sausage making. Just that it's delicious and ready to serve. We can't let some obscure rule from Brussels derail this train." He then turned to the CEO. "Don't worry, Mr. Davies. I'll personally make sure she doesn't get lost in the weeds. We'll hit our date." I just sat back in my chair, feeling completely invisible. He hadn't just ridiculed me. He'd promised the CEO he would manage me. In that moment, something shifted. The sting of humiliation sharpened into a cold, clear focus. He wanted me to just get it done. He wanted that green stamp of approval. Fine. I would do my job. I would do it more thoroughly than ever before. Not for him, but for myself. And that's when it all changed. What Harrison didn't know was that I had already spent the last 3 nights pulling apart Chimera's bill of materials. His team had made a last-minute change, swapping a key power management chip for a cheaper one from a new supplier in Shenzhen. It was a classic Harrison move, saving a few cents per unit to add millions to his profit margin. He'd buried the change in a mountain of paperwork, probably assuming I'd be too swamped to notice and would just rubber stamp it. That night, after the meeting, I wasn't just working late, I was on a mission. The office was dead silent. I started digging into the new supplier. On the surface, they looked fine, but something felt off. I cross-referenced their certification numbers with official databases. Most checked out, but one, a critical one for electromagnetic interference or EMI, was weird. The certificate number was valid, but it was for a totally different company and a completely different product. It was like finding a single typo in a 1,000-page book. Easy to miss, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. I spent the next 2 hours falling down a rabbit hole, using the company's deep dive supply chain verification service. What I found made my blood run cold. The supplier was a shell company. They were buying cheap, uncertified junk, repackaging it, and slapping fake certification labels on it. The power chip Harrison had swapped in to save a few bucks wasn't just uncertified, it was a known knockoff. Now, this is where the sausage making, as Harrison so charmingly put it, gets important. An uncertified power chip isn't just a paperwork problem. These things manage heat and prevent short circuits. A faulty one could overheat, breaking the device. In a worst-case scenario, it could start a fire. The flaw specifically violated a major EU safety directive. It was catastrophic. It was like building a beautiful supercar, but to save money, you make the brake pads out of cardboard. It looks fine in the showroom, but the moment you actually need it, you're headed for disaster. I leaned back in my chair, the gravity of what I'd found settling in. The launch was weeks away. Mass production was probably already starting. Hundreds of thousands of these tiny fire hazards were about to be shipped to homes all over the world. All because our COO wanted to pad his profit margin. The irony was just chef's kiss. He called me a ghost. And like a ghost, I just found the skeleton in his closet. If you've ever dealt with a toxic boss who mocked your dedication, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe, because you're not going to want to miss how this ghost got her revenge. I spent the next week working with a kind of chilling purpose. I didn't breathe a word of my discovery to anyone. Not my team, not my boss, and definitely not Harrison. Instead, I built my case. I documented everything with methodical precision. The fake certificate, the background check on the shell company, the tech specs of the knockoff chip, and a detailed analysis of the specific regulations it violated. I even ran simulations modeling the potential for overheating, and the numbers were staggering. Then I wrote a 13-page report. It was dry, professional, and utterly damning. It didn't have a single personal word in it. It was just cold, hard, undeniable fact. It ended with a simple, direct recommendation: an immediate halt to production and a full recall of any assembled units. I attached the report to a calendar invite for the final sign-off meeting. The subject line was innocent: Final Compliance Review for Project Chimera. I sent it to the same group: Harrison, the CEO, and all the department heads. The day of the meeting came. I walked into the same boardroom where I'd been humiliated. This time, I felt no fear, just a calm, serene clarity. The room was buzzing. Harrison was at the head of the table, holding court, basking in the glow of his impending victory. He was wearing an expensive suit and an even more expensive smile. He saw me walk in and gave me a condescending nod. "Ah, Sarah, glad you could make it. I trust you've come bearing good news." "Green lights all the way, I hope," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I have my report," I said, quietly taking my seat. The meeting started with a round of back-patting. Marketing was ready, sales were ecstatic. Then it was my turn. Harrison introduced me with a flourish. And now for the final rubber stamp. "Sarah, Please tell us we are officially good to go. Let's make this quick. I took a breath and looked directly at the CEO, Mr. Davies. Unfortunately, I began. The word hung in the air, instantly sucking all the joy out of the room. I cannot, in good conscience, sign off on the launch of Project Chimera. You could hear a collective gasp. Harrison's smile didn't just falter, it evaporated. It was like watching a statue crack. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I said I cannot sign off on the launch," I repeated, my voice steady. I put my screen on the main display, and my 13-page report appeared. A recent, undocumented hardware change has introduced a critical safety and compliance failure into the device. The room was dead silent. Harrison's face had gone from tan to a pale, blotchy white. "A hardware change? What are you talking about? The hardware was locked." "A week and a half ago," I said, "the primary power management chip was swapped for a cheaper alternative from SCC Electronics." I clicked to the next slide, showing the side-by-side specs. This change wasn't submitted through proper channels and wasn't flagged for a full compliance review. Harrison shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. It was a minor cost-saving measure. You're holding up a billion-dollar launch over a 40-cent component." "I'm holding up the launch because the 40-cent component is fraudulent," I said, my gaze locked on his. I then walked them through it, piece by excruciating piece. I showed them the faked certificate, the shell company records, the tech data on the knockoff chip's thermal instability. "This isn't a theoretical risk," I explained, clicking to my simulation results. "We can project a thermal failure in as many as 1 in every 5,000 units. With 1,000,000 units, that's up to 200 devices overheating. Best case, they just die and we have a massive public recall. Worst case," I paused, letting it sink in, "they cause a fire. The European Union's rapid alert system for this kind of thing does not mess around. We'd face a complete ban from the EU market for years. The damage to our reputation would be catastrophic." A profound silence fell over the room. The CFO was staring at my recall cost projections, his face ashen. The head of legal was reading the EU directive on my screen. And Harrison was just unraveling. "This is a joke," he stammered, looking around for an ally and finding none. "She's exaggerating. This is the compliance department trying to justify its own existence. She's always been against this timeline." Mr. Davies, the CEO, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "Daniel, did you approve this component change without a full review?" Harrison was trapped. It was a business decision, a calculated risk to maintain our timeline. "That's not what I asked," Mr. Davies said, his voice dropping another 10 degrees. "Did you personally approve this change and bypass standard protocol?" Harrison swallowed hard. "Yes," he squeaked. That one word sealed his fate. Mr. Davies then turned to me. His expression wasn't disappointed, it was respectful. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm, "thank you. Your diligence here wasn't a hurdle. It was a godsend. You have, without exaggeration, just saved this company from a disaster." He turned back to the room. "The launch is halted, effective immediately. I want a full audit of every component in Project Chimera. Sarah," he said, looking right at me, "I want you to lead it. You will have whatever resources you need. Your department has final sign-off on every single part. No exceptions." The look on Harrison's face was a masterpiece of humiliation. He'd been publicly stripped of his authority over his own project. The office ghost he'd mocked was now in charge. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a single personal attack. I had simply done my job with the meticulousness he despised, and it dismantled his career right in front of his eyes. He slowly sank back into his chair, a broken man in the ruins of his own ambition. The meeting was over. The fallout was immediate and huge. The official announcement went out within the hour, Project Chimera launch postponed. The company's stock took a dip, but our PR team, guided by Mr. Davies, spun it as proactive responsibility. We weren't a company that failed. We were a company that bravely chose customer safety over profits. And the internal hero of that story, whispered in the hallways, was me. My new role as head of the Chimera Audit Task Force gave me unprecedented authority, reporting directly to the CEO. The same engineers who used to avoid me now came to me with deference, seeking my approval on every little thing. The project's entire culture shifted overnight from move fast and break things to get it right no matter what. Harrison was, for all intents and purposes, gone. He wasn't fired right away. That would have been too messy. Instead, he was publicly sidelined. He was removed from Project Chimera and reassigned to exploring new strategic initiatives, the corporate version of being sent to a corner to think about what you've done. He still had his fancy title, but he had no power. He became a ghost in his own right, haunting the hallways, a walking reminder of colossal failure. He stopped making eye contact with me. The smug grin was gone, replaced by a tight, bitter line. My late nights continued, but now they were different. They were a focused effort to fix a problem. I led the team that sourced a new, fully certified, high-quality power chip. We revetted every single component. It took another 4 months, but we rebuilt Project Chimera from the ground up to be not just innovative, but bulletproof. About a month later, Mr. Davies called me into his office. He told me Harrison had quietly resigned. No farewell party, just a brief, sterile email. The golden boy had crashed and burned. Then Mr. Davies slid a paper across his desk. It was an offer, a promotion to Vice President of Global Compliance and Risk Management, a new C-suite role. It came with a massive salary increase, a corner office, and most importantly, a permanent seat at the executive table. "Your work is not a hurdle, Sarah," he said, echoing his words from that meeting. "It's the foundation this company needs to build on. I want your voice in the room for every major decision we make." The ultimate vindication wasn't just the promotion or Harrison's downfall. It was the change in the company's values. My meticulousness, the very thing I was ridiculed for, was now a core principle. The ghost was now one of the most visible leaders in the company. My dedication hadn't just stopped a bad product, it had set a new course for the entire organization, proving that doing things right is always faster than doing them fast. So that's how my COO's mockery backfired in the most spectacular way possible. He thought my dedication was a weakness to be laughed at. In the end, it was the only thing that stood between his ambition and a corporate catastrophe. He built a gorgeous car but forgot the brakes. I was the nerdy mechanic he mocked, who just happened to be the only one who bothered to check them before he drove it off a cliff. My name is no longer associated with ghosts or paperwork. It's associated with integrity. And that is a revenge far sweeter than any I could have ever planned. Let me know in the comments below. What's the most satisfying moment of workplace justice you've ever witnessed? I read every single one. Thanks for watching.